So I want to know from the people at the back, anybody, if you got a chance, are you taking the plane to get out of Ghana? Let me see by show of hands if your answer is yes. When you hear these people come and say, hey, this is a beautiful country, we need to reinvest back on the continent, how does that make you feel?
I feel it's because they have money. That's why they are coming back home. But for me, I want to leave the country because the economy here is very bad.
Okay. Let me hear one more person at the back.
I would love to leave the country. Like, just as they are saying, when they were coming, they came with money, which is making their life comfortable. But we in the country, people are struggling on the street. If such person get opportunity, in fact, the person will leave the country.
Prof, what do you make of it when you hear that the local population here already has an assumption that you're wealthier, that there's an income disparity inbuilt?
I had translators coming from the University of Ghana at a conference that I just had, and we hired them to teach Chi. They had two students. From the two students who were paying them, they were able to get enough money to pay their entire master's degree for 1 year. And that was a message that they learned. There's someone in the world who wants any skill that you know how to do, and they're willing to pay you richly to do it.
Let me ask Jeff what he thinks here, because he is swallowing hard. I don't know if you think this is great advice or if you see it as somewhat condescending. What are your views?
I heard my sister from behind me say that these people have money coming in. Yes, they may think that what they have is not enough for them as they come in here, but it brings a certain gap. But at the end of the day, once the prices go up, it doesn't come down. And we are the ones who suffer eventually. And that is a problem we are facing here today. Their presence is actually creating a problem for us economically.
Mr. Kwesi, obviously.
Native Sons is about Black Americans who returned to Africa long before Alex Haley and Roots to found the first republic on that continent. Liberia, a nation on the east coast of Africa whose roots are in the United States. Most of the news out of Africa, independent Africa, and southern Africa has been a catalog of brutality, tribal war, and insane slaughter. Well, Liberia is free of those things, but it suffers from a different, less newsworthy kind of African sickness. The sadness and seediness, petty corruption, and grand larceny, black and white mischief. You'll find it all in Liberia. Liberia calls itself a republic. In fact, it is an oligarchy, ruled by a few, but the few that belong to 300 families descended from the original settlers. Families who are at the top and see to it that they stay at the top. 150 years ago, American philanthropists and freed slaves had the idea of a state in Africa. It was in no sense a return to a promised land, but an escape from a land that held no promise. The Liberian Declaration of Independence is modeled on the American one, except for some key language. It states that Liberians were originally Americans, who were forced by conditions to seek asylum abroad from their deep degradation. And so they landed on this beach as colonists, American colonists, who imposed themselves on what they called the uncivilized natives. Africa was as alien to them as it was to the first white settlers elsewhere. And just as in the white settlements, everything that was done in the name of Christian civilization. They brought with them their Western religion and proceeded to convert the natives to it. The result has been a unique Christianity with echoes of an Africa as old as life. But to those Pilgrim Fathers, America was the old country. They named places Maryland and New Georgia and Virginia. And they built houses that have that same southern look, a cross between the old slave quarters and the old plantation house. The absence of a colonial legacy has its disadvantages. No tradition of civil service, terrible communications, primitive education and medical care. In Liberia, they started from scratch with little outside help. Not even the conscience money its neighbors received from former colonial masters. All it got from America was a memory. The grand old flag with 49 fewer stars. The currency is the US dollar. The mailboxes are American. The cop on the beat wears a New York City Police Department uniform. The capital is Monrovia, named after U.S. President James Monroe. Liberia is stable without the paratroop enforcers you find in so much of black and white Africa. This is the Liberia most familiar to Americans, the Liberia of President William Tubman. He ran things as an elected dictator for 27 years. It had the look of 19th century America in blackface. Tubman insisted on things like silk hats and frock coats. Everyone, diplomats included, sweated it out in the West African heat. But the clothes clearly defined the classes. The only thing the colonialists had in common with the natives was the color of their skin. It was ruled by elite, by the top 300 families who could trace their lineage back to the Exodus. Well, Tubman's gone. He died 8 years ago and was replaced by this man, William Tolbert. The president still sets the rules for dress. The leisure suit has replaced the frock coat. There have been other changes, but mainly in look and style. It is still ruled by elite, by the top people who regard the nation as a private inheritance. The president disputes this, says Liberia is a democracy. It does have an American-style constitution, a Senate and a House of Representatives, and free elections. But there's only one party, and that's been the case for all of this century. Liberians resent things like the report that Ambassador Andrew Young described them as a bunch of Uncle Toms. And they're angry with President Carter, who passed through the country on his trip to Africa. No way to be treated by the mother country.
You see, the president passed through here and went to Nigeria and stayed there for days and came here for a few hours. That's your daughter? You pass by your daughter and go to somebody else's place and stay 2-3 days, and you don't even lay your head on one pillar in her house. Tell her, we don't like it, and she must change her ways. Thank you.
The top families, known as honorables, number about 40,000 out of Liberia's 1.7 million people. They have names like Carter and Phillips and Dennis. This is a wedding party that the Coopers are giving for the Campbells. There are impossibly complicated cross-connections through intermarriage in these family trees. It ensures that power and money remains in the same hands generation after generation. And the American connection is continually being reinforced. Most young Americo-Liberians are educated in the United States, and they often bring back American brides. That's what one of the Bernard brothers did. They've both just returned from college at North Carolina and Western Michigan to take up the family fortune amassed by their late father, the former director of police. So there's the transportation company, the car rental, the bus service, the heavy trucking of gas.
Right.
There's this extraordinary beachfront property that's going to become a holiday hotel.
Exactly. Apartments, farms, other real estate here and there.
This is not, I got to tell you, an image of Africa and Africans that most Americans have.
We do have a mixture of the indigenous African and then what some would call the civilized African. We are sort of a blend of, both.
One of the reasons for the blend is that marital fidelity in Liberia is almost unheard of. President Tolbert himself has only one wife, but he has children by many women and is said to be as virile at 65 as he was in his 20s. He's a Baptist minister and former head of the World Baptist Alliance, but he feels no moral or ethical conflict.
You know, one of the fascinating things about life in this country, particularly for an outsider, are the family relationships. I mean, how it works. So that a man may have a wife and a couple of mistresses and have children that are born out of wedlock that are nevertheless brought into the family. In your own youth, I gather, sir, that you fathered children outside your immediate family. How does it work?
It works well. Liberian life is peculiar life. In fact, we are a close-knit people. If you touch one, you touch more or less all. Those who are not related by blood somehow or another, they are close. We have what we call the extended family life.
Bernard boys had the same father, but different mothers. One, the father's wife, the other, their father's friend. It isn't a question of many wives.
No. It's the
One
children.
wife.
We don't. It's not a matter of polygamy. It's. There's only one wife. My father's only had one wife at a time, and it's not a matter of just.
He had one wife, but how many children did he have by women other than that one wife?
Oh, about 13.
Really?
Yeah.
Liberia has great wealth and has a reputation for being easy pickings for the international conglomerates, providing they deal with the right families. Firestone Tire owns most of the rubber, along with eminent Liberians. The field hands earn $7.50 a week. And there's iron. A foreign consortium extracts the ore, and the government extracts half their profits. And for special people, special shares were created. So a few benefit grandly from this joint venture. And Liberia has the world's largest shipping fleet registered under its flag, a flag of convenience. The convenience being tax breaks and casual scrutiny of crews and ships. And there's talk of oil, and there's uranium and gold and diamonds, and vast resources of timberlands that are just beginning to be exploited. But the fact is, most of the wealth that all of those natural blessings Liberia has stays up there among the 40,000 people at the top of the heap. And no one is more top than William Tolbert, this great-great-grandchild of slavery who can trace his roots back to South Carolina, has farms and rubber plantations, and family connections with businesses all over the country. He is president of a republic, but he lives like a feudal prince, or more correctly, an enlightened African chief. All up the West African coast, it is called dash, the small gift to a servant who has performed well. Crisp new U.S. currency to his workers and their families, and while the cameras are there, to just about anyone who asks. President Tolbert deplores the very idea that anyone might believe that Liberia is controlled by family compacts. Well, take a look at the country's biggest private business. The Meserato Corporation is involved in many things. Its biggest enterprise is fishing, catching and freezing shrimp and lobster for the export market. It also has a monopoly on commercial fishing for the domestic market. Vice President in charge of Meserato Fishing, Richard Tolbert, Harvard, Columbia Law School, and the president's nephew.
If you need to get any more people on a temporary basis, do.
Over at Meserato's headquarters, you'll find more Tolberts. Stephanette, vice president in charge of everything. Sietta Tolbert, working her way up through the finance department. And Lori Tolbert, in charge of retail sales.
It's rare to find a firm anywhere that's such a family firm as this one.
If there's any crisis, the family automatically binds together. So that if there are any kind of problems, it's just a matter of picking up the phone and saying, I need you, and everybody comes. And that's the way we've been brought up.
Business is business, politics is politics, and family is family. President Tolbert says he'll not run again when his term is up in 5 years.
We don't have $750,000 to give you either.
Among the most likely candidates are Shad Tubman, son of the former president and son-in-law of Mr. Tolbert. But the man most people in Monrovia say is the hottest candidate is this man, A. Benedict Tolbert, trained at Oberlin University, a gentleman farmer, a dynamo of a politician, and the son of the president.
I am the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives. I'm also the co-chairman on the Committee on Education. I'm also a member of the Committee on Information and Cultural Affairs. Out of government, I am president of the Liberian Federation of Trade Unions, also a minister of the gospel, an evangelist, a spiritualist.
That's a pretty full day you've described.
That's right. Personally, I am a child of the universe, and I belong to the school of a Senate Master's teaching called the Great White Brotherhood. There are several hierarchies in the universal cosmological world. And so you have a master, in charge of wealth, who is called the Master Fortuna. You have a master in charge of governments and nations of the world called El Moya. You have a master in charge of freedom of the universe called Saint Germain. You have a master for justice called Portia. You have a master for wisdom called the goddess of Mercury. But this does not bring about blasphemy, nor does it make about Sarah gods. It doesn't bring about a pantheon of gods. And if it were not so, I would not have told you.
Tell me, in purely practical terms, and one hears this rumored about in the political circles here, that you're a pretty good candidate to be the next president of Liberia.
I believe I am because of the way I live. You see, God doesn't make many leaders. He makes few leaders. If he made many leaders, then he wouldn't have followers.
No, but in a purely personal way, does this cause some family quarrels or tensions?
Not at all. I am not ambitious to become president. I only regard myself as a presidential timber because I know I'm capable of governing not only Liberia but the whole of Africa. And if the great divine master of human events decides through the minds of the people to use me as a presidential candidate, not only will I rule Liberia, but I shall endeavor to rule the whole of Africa by uniting the continent.
Into one?
This is my goal, my objective and my aim in my lifetime, to see Africa united.
With A.B. Tolbert as president?
Maybe.
A chip from the block.
And I gather you were a chip off your old man's block as well. Liberians at an official level deny that the country is ruled by nepotism. But at the same time, they point to a number of things. That in white America, it is not unknown for certain powerful families to be in politics and business at the same time, or for the same old names to keep getting all the good jobs, or for networks of relatives and friends to look after their own, or for men in public life to be unfaithful to their wives. It's just that in the United States, hypocritically, we try to cover it up. That, rather refreshingly, is not one of the American qualities those African pilgrim fathers brought with them when they came to the dark continent.